Hello and welcome to another Magic Boy Productions Commander gameplay video. I'm Ben, aka Magic Boy on Magic Online, and today we'll be checking out a controlling 2-boxy build of the Seriema from Edge of Eternities. This video will consist of a deck overview, 2 narrated games from our point of view that break down the gameplay, post-game reviews, and our final thoughts on the deck after all is said and done. There's a lot going on with this deck, but we should talk about our commander first, since the Seriema really supports the overall game plan. This 3-mana mono-white spacecraft lets us tutor up any legendary creature when it enters, and becomes a 5/5 flying beater that grants indestructible to all of our tapped legends when stationed to 7+. Obviously, we're packing a lot of legends, and the variety of effects available make this an excellent toolbox deck. We'll get into some of the options available later, but there are 2 legends in particular that help form an engine with the Seriema and will often be the first cards we search up. Philia, Exuberant Shepherd, lets us blink the Seriema over and over, finding more and more legends. It also lets us reuse other enters the battlefield triggers or remove problematic opposing permanents temporarily. Gandalf the White doubles up all our legendary triggers, which has some interesting interactions scattered throughout the list, but most importantly gets 2 legends from the Seriema and lets us cast them at flash speed. Because Philia brings the Seriema back at end step, Gandalf lets us deploy what we find before we untap again. Most opponents will aim to disrupt this sooner rather than later, but it only takes a few cycles of this pattern of plays to develop some inevitability. And we have backups for both Philia and Gandalf, and Gilrain, Dunedain Protector, and Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. Machine Mommy is often worth grabbing regardless, since we have plenty of non-legendary triggers for her to double too, and she can shut down tons of options our opponents might have. We have a few other blink engines as well, and with access to so much of that effect, we've included a variety of enters the battlefield creatures to make the most of them. It might be tempting to beeline for Philia and Gandalf each game, but we're often better served doing some setup beforehand if we can. It's better to hit the 5-mana mark so that we can cast Seriema, grab Philia, and then cast her before we untap. With that in mind, we have a solid amount of ramp and utility for the first few turns, with some deck building considerations to maximize the catch-up ramp that White excels at. We can also hold off on grabbing Philia depending how the game is progressing. We might want to find Cloud, who has a robust equipment package, or Venat to start building up card advantage if we aren't going to be able to connect with Philia yet. Fast starts from opponents might demand grabbing an interactive legendary like Lord of the Third Path or Linvala, Keeper of Silence. If things are going smoothly, it can be helpful to search up ways of protecting the game plan like Ambrosia Whiteheart or Boromir, Warden of the Tower, to present some inevitability. We can also start searching up more aggressive legends to start putting pressure on our opponents if the way is clear. It's hard to classify this deck overall because there are a lot of archetypes mashed together, but at its heart it's a control deck that looks to answer what our opponents are doing while accumulating card advantage until we become unstoppable. It uses the Legends Matter and Blink archetypes with a smattering of White Weenie and Hate Bears to accomplish that. With that in mind, we need to talk about Celestial Corinne. This is the first card I thought of when I saw the Seriema spoiled because it's one I've always wanted to make work, but never quite managed to find a list I was happy with. This OG Kamigawa throwback can provide surgical mass removal, and the Seriema lets us tutor up several legendary spirits to go with it to help deal with certain mana values. The Seriema itself can also come online to make it so that the Corinne is even more asymmetrical, protecting our legends that share a mana value with our opponent's permanents. It's worth noting that if you're interested in building this at bracket 4, including Omarthus, Ghostfire Initiate unlocks tutorable mass land destruction from the command zone. We're not getting up to any of that, but we did include several synergistic non-legendary spirits and even a few arcane spells to supplement the Corinne's destructive capabilities. White is great at control, and so we packed several powerful pieces of targeted and mass interaction. Split Up works very well with the Seriema, helping set up a one-sided board wipe for only 3 mana, and Myojin of Cleansing Fire is expensive but tutorable, and synergizes with the indestructibility from our commander. Having access to the Myojin, Ambrosia, and Gandalf sets up a nightmare scenario for opponents where we can repeatedly wipe their boards while leaving our own intact. Elspeth Sun's Champion can blow up tall boards, or help us go wide to clog up combat or start getting aggressive. The rest of the deck is made up of other blink effects, additional card advantage, protection and recursion elements, and ways to build us a board so that we aren't leaving our opponents with too long a clock once we've taken control of the game. Elish Norn Grand Cenobite is one of the most aggressive options at our disposal, and combining Gisela and Bruna into Brizella presents a monstrous threat that shuts off a lot of answers to what we're up to. We also have some additional tutoring that can help find pieces the Seriema can't. We have redundant spells for almost all of the effects our legends carry so that we aren't easily shut out by creature hate or torpor orb effects. This is a very mana-hungry deck, so all 3 of our game changers provide powerful ramping. Ancient Tomb gets us ahead by a turn, Mana Vault can allow for a powerful play ahead of curve or set up a turn where we cast Seriema and whatever it finds, and Smothering Tithe can easily help us cast multiple powerful legends each turn. We play 39 lands total, including MDFCs, because we really want to hit our land drops. Being monocolored, we have access to plenty of utility. We also play bounce lands in Lowe's Field to set up our catch-up ramp, fetch lands to synergize with our recursion, and some deserts for Sand Scout to go find. Playing carefully with the Seriema itself is an important part of this deck. Stationing it makes it an attractive target for creature removal, and when that happens, it's often a huge loss of tempo, so we usually want to keep it an artifact until we're ready to capitalize on the indestructibility it grants, or we suspect an opponent might be ready to wipe the board. Now that we've covered the deck in our plan, let's hop into some games. Our first opponent this game is another mono white deck, Shram, Senior Edificer. Most Shram lists are Equipment Voltron decks, but he does trigger horrors and vehicles as well, so there's room for some spice. As a 2-drop that draws cards, Shram is extremely consistent, and Voltron commanders almost always warp tables a bit since they're incentivized to go after one player, so it could pay off to slow things down on our side. Shram won the die roll and will be going first. In the third seat, we have Ruby, Daring Tracker. This mana dork in the command zone might seem innocuous, but ramp decks are very good at preying on the casual commander format. We're expecting to see a lot of ramping into giant monsters, and if that happens, it would be a good idea to attack the Ruby player early to apply pressure before they can get big butts into play. Going last is Terra, Herald of Hope, a Mardu commander that I underrated when it first dropped due to requiring combat damage to get its trigger, but she's proven herself to me in several games. If this deck is anything like the others I've faced, it'll be great at grinding and applying steady pressure to the table with all the value that Terra digs up. Our opening hand is too good to mulligan, but not particularly great. Cloud stands out as an early play that can find us a Skull Clamp to dig deeper in our deck. We have 3 lands, which is nice, but none of them are fetches to go with our Savin's Reclamation, and our later plays in Throne of Eldraine and Rune of the Fading Light should give us some staying power. Everyone keeps 7 cards, and everyone just plays out lands in the first turn. The Terrace comes in the form of Bloodstained Mire into Elegant Parlor, surveilling to the top of their library. Shram plays a second Plains, and we're expecting to see their commander hit the field, but instead they cast Dowsing Dagger, which feels like incorrect sequencing. But never mind, it's great, because we get some plants, woo! That suggests that Shram might view us as the least threatening deck in a vacuum, which is good to keep in mind. We draw Beza, which could be a great target for our sword to blink. We play our own Plains and cast Cloud, who's the equipment deck now, putting a Skull Clamp into our hand. This isn't a play I'm crazy about, since it could draw aggro from the rest of the table, but we can't take the turn off, and Blackblade Reforged is more of a late game card for us. Ruby has a Firelit Thicket and casts Sylvan Library. That's a great reason to pressure their life total, which we were thinking about doing anyway. Terra plays a Badlands and casts Ban in the Return, a great 2-drop for supporting the deck's game plan. Shram has a third play and their commander hits the field. We're happy to find a 4th land in Windswept Heath, especially since we have Savin's Reclamation already. We play a Plains and cast our commander, and with the source of card advantage already in hand, we search up Philia before passing. I know, I said we should pressure the ramp deck, but we don't want to be the first one to attack them if we can help it, since it could start a feud we don't want, and we're already looking pretty threatening. We discard Savin's Reclamation and Cleanup since it works just fine out of the yard. They untap and trigger their Sylvan Library, not paying any life for additional cards. They cast their commander, then use Ruby's mana to cast Fyndhorn Elves, which helps offset the fact that they missed a land drop. Obviously the library didn't show them any lands, but I definitely would have drawn at least one there in hopes of finding one next turn, if I were them. Terra loses 3 to play an untapped Witchblessed Meadow, and Terra herself comes down. They head to combat, milling a swamp and an Andrag's Rampage, then pass. Shram has a Vesuva, which copies our Plains instead of our Minas Tirith. Maybe they have an Emiria in their deck, or maybe they just don't expect to attack with more than one creature. They spend 2 to equip the dagger to Shram and then swing him into the Gruul player, which we like to see. The dwarf connects for 4 commander damage, and the dagger transforms into Lost Veil, which they use in their second main to cast Sword of Body and Mind before tapping out to cast land taps. We draw Knight of the White Orchid and are happy to cast it while it can get a trigger. We search off a tapped Plains and play our fetch land before casting Skull Clamp and pass it, planning to let the dog out before the turn comes back to us. Ruby shows the most restraint of any Sylvan Library player I've ever seen, opting not to draw any cards a second time. They did find a forest though, and use it to cast Garruk's Uprising. Hopefully the Shram player thinks all their ramp and card advantage is scarier than ours. Speaking of scary, Terra plays Phyrexian Tower and uses it to cast Grim Hireling before heading to combat. Terra's mill presents 2 great hits in Cyan, Vengeful Samurai, and White Plume Adventurer. They swing Terra at Ruby, which again signals that the Gruul player is higher on the aggro chart than us, and Bannon heads for the wide open Shram player. Both creatures connect, triggering Terra and Grim Hireling, and the player stacks their triggers correctly to get their 4 treasures first, so they can use 2 of them to pay for Terra's reanimation. She brings back Cyan, who's liable to become a huge double-striking threat as the game goes on. Having definitely seized the Mantle of Threat, Terra passes with 5 cards in hand and 2 open treasures. Shram has Field of the Dead, a surprising game changer for a mono white deck that clearly has a lot of Plains. They cast Caduceus, Staff of Hermes, then equip it and Sword of Body and Mind to their commander. They swing at the Terra player, which is a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, they might be able to kill them next turn. On the other, milling a graveyard deck for 10 could go very wrong. Shram connects for 9 lifelinking commander damage, creating a wolf and dumping a bunch of excellent cards into Terra's graveyard. On their end step, we crack our Heath for a Plains and cast Philia. We draw and play Lazotep Quarry and then cast our Sword of Hearth and Home. We entrust the sword to our dog and send her at the Ruby player. With Shram working on Terra, we want to signal that we're not getting involved just yet, and the setup Ruby has been doing can make them very scary when the dust settles. Felia's trigger exiles the Seriema until end of turn, and thanks to Pro Green, she connects for 4 and the sword goes off. We grab an untapped Plains and blink Cloud, pulling Blackblade Reforged out of our deck. Cloud doesn't have any equipment left to get, so in our second main phase, we equip Gull Clamp to the Smash Brothers character. It triggers twice thanks to his ability, drawing us 4 cards, and we're happy to see Heliod's intervention, which will be great for dealing with Shram down the line. The Seriema returns, and Felia picks up a counter. We grab Adeline, Resplendent Cathar to go with our Skull Clamp before discarding our Arid Archway and our Bizo, both of which the time for has passed. Sylvan Library is basically just Miri's Guile with more words again on Ruby's draw step, but they seem to have solved their land flow problem and play a forest. They follow up with Gorklaw, Terror of Calcisma, and it's big enough to trigger Garruk's Uprising and draw them a card. Fortunately, they don't have a reduced cost 4-drop to cast and pass after that. Terra heads straight to combat, milling Orzhov Basilica and Smile at Death. They hedge a bit, maybe trying to reduce their threat index by sending Terra at us, Cyan at Ruby, and the Hireling and Bannon at Shram. Bannon triggers on attack, but they don't have time for that. The Wolf token gets in front of Grim Hireling, then Cyan connects for first strike damage, making 2 treasures, and then regular strike damage happens and the Wolf and Hireling trade, and Terra makes 6 more treasures before using Terra to bring the Hireling right back, which grows Cyan. They head into their second main with 12 mana and plenty of cards, and we're worried about the likes of Ruinous Ultimatum, but instead they continue developing their recursive board with the Carmen Cruel Sky Marcher, who gets multiple triggers as they sacrifice 4 treasures to cast Redemption Choir. The Choir triggers and they bring back White Plume Adventurer, taking the initiative and venturing into the secret entrance to find a basic Plains and growing Cyan again. They play that Plains, then use 2 more treasures, triggering Carmen twice more, to cast Alesha who laughs at fate. Alesha triggers on their end step, returning Esper Sentinel, which adds another counter to the Vengeful Samurai. Finally done with their terrifying turn, they pass, and we're really hoping Shram can kill them. On Shram's upkeep, White Plume and land taps trigger, the Adventurer untaps Cyan, and the Edificer finds 2 basic Plains. They play one of them and cast Sword of Light and Shadow, triggering Shram and Esper Sentinel, which they don't pay for, so Terra draws a card too. Unfortunately, Sword of Light and Shadow doesn't play well with Caduceus, which is white, and falls off when the sword is equipped. They follow up with Leyline Axe, drawing off Shram again, and then head to combat. Dual-wielding Shram is still a 2-turn clock on Terra, and Shram fights the good fight by swinging at them. Shram connects, taking the initiative and grabbing a Plains, then mills 10 more cards for Terra and makes another Wolf before gaining 3 life since they don't have any creatures to return to their hand. On our upkeep, Terra untaps their Grim Hireling, and we draw a pretty unexciting Wasteland. We play a Plains and let the dog out. We still have free attacks on Ruby, but we want to let the others know that we're helping deal with the problem and attack Terra. We could try to take the initiative from Shram, but frankly we don't want anyone incentivized to attack us, and also they're dealing with Terra. Felia's attack trigger exiles the Seriema again. They don't chump block and we connect, searching up a Plains and exiling Knight of the White Orchid for the fun of it. We cast a Pearl Medallion post-combat, paying for the Esper Sentinel, and then cast Bruna to get back Cloud. Terra will probably be dealing with Shram on their turn, but it doesn't hurt to make ourselves harder to attack. When the Seriema comes back on end step, we consider our options before taking Yosei the Morningstar. With our Lazotep Quarry, the Dragon could end up shutting someone down for a whole turn in the future. Ruby still doesn't draw with their library, but that's understandable with their life total and the state of the board. They spend 5 mana to cast the very powerful Old Gnawbone, drawing a card from their Uprising, then they head to combat and swing Ruby and the Dragon at Shram. Gorklaw and Ruby both trigger, and their buff board connects, making them 8 treasures and taking the initiative, and they search up a forest. They play that forest and then sacrifice 4 of their treasures, triggering Carmen 4 more times, to cast a discounted Vuric Thar, which is a great blocker and could potentially dish out a lot of damage at this stage of the game. Drawing another card from Garruk's Uprising before they pass to Terra. The Mardu player doesn't have enough treasure production, apparently, and cracks a treasure to trigger Carmen and help cast the Reaver Cleaver, which triggers Vuric Thar, smacking them for 6. They equip it to Carmen, and then head to combat, milling Shannon, Sleeper Scourge, and Arena of Glory from Terra's trigger. They send the 14/14 Carmen at us, oof, and Alicia, the Choir, Grim Hireling, Cyan, and Terra at Shram. The attack results in several triggers, getting them a counter on Alesha, reanimating Shannon with Carmen, and then Treasure Nabber with the Choir, both of which make Cyan bigger, and then they ignore Bannon's trigger again. We attempt to block Carmen with Bruna, and then realize that Shannon's return has granted menace to all of their legends. Cyan connects first, making 2 treasures from the Hireling, and then everything else hits, taking us down to 22 and Shram down to 17. They make 4 more treasures, and then use 2, triggering Carmen, to pay for Terra's ability, which brings back Grim Hireling yet again. Carmen's Reaver Cleaver trigger brings them up to 18 total treasures, and it's not looking great for the rest of us. They crack treasures after combat, making 7 black mana and making Carmen even bigger, and we're bracing for the worst. Once again though, they develop their board rather than messing with anyone else's by casting Guardian Scalelord, which puts its backup counter on Grim Hireling. Several more treasures and Carmen triggers later, and they do cast a big spell. Command the Dread Horde, which triggers Vuric Thar again, and they pay 29 life into the Timu Res of the Dark Realms, bringing them all the way down to 2. In exchange for all that life, they get Kefka Dancing Mad, Mog Moogle Warrior, Warren Soul Trader, Sepulchral Primordial, Sun Titan, and Locked Treasure Hunter from their graveyard. Turns out that the sort of body and mind milling was not ideal. Sepulchral Primordial and Sun Titan trigger, which steals our Beza, netting them another treasure, and brings back Arena of Glory. Cyan triggered as well, and while he isn't Carmen huge yet, he's still terrifying. They still aren't done yet though, and crack a few more treasures to cast Skyclave Apparition to remove the threat of Sword of Light and Shadow, defanging Shram. They then sacrifice the apparition to Warren Soul Trader for another treasure and a Carmen trigger, which gives Shram a 3/3. They finally go to end step and get a few more triggers. Everyone but us discards then draws, netting Terra a Moogle token and a 1/1 counter on it in Mog. Kefka randomly casts the Eternal Witness that Ruby just discarded, and returns one of my favorite cards to their hand, Reconstruct History. Finally, Alessia brings back the Skyclave Apparition, triggering Cyan yet again, and exiling the Leyline Axe to make absolutely sure Shram doesn't pose a threat. They finally pass what is definitely the most complicated turn I've ever had to edit on this channel at 8 life after all their payments and Carmen triggers. On Shram's upkeep, White Plume Adventure untaps Carmen, and Shram uses land tax to find a single plains. They equip Caduceus to Shram, giving us hope that they might have found something that will let them get through for 6 more commander damage, but then they cast Shadow Spear, which Rurik Thar dislikes, but they do get to draw a card. They follow up with Blackblade Reforged, going down to 5 thanks to the Angry Ogre, and drawing again. And then they opt to go out on their own turn, showing off the Lorien's Brooch that they finally found, which triggers Rurik Thar once again. Good game to them. On our upkeep, Terra untaps Cyan, and our draw step yields a plane. We really don't have many options here, and it's a very precarious situation for all of us, though Terra definitely has the upper hand, since if they untap again, they're definitely taking down the rest of the table. We can deny them an untap step though, and get in for some damage, so we cast Yosei and use it to help station up the Seriema before sacrificing it to Lazotep Quarry. The Spirit Dragon's Death yields a Carmen trigger, but we tap down the Sky Marcher and their other flyer, the Guardian Scale Lord, along with 3 other creatures that we basically picked at random because their board was tiny and hard to parse. We finish stationing our commander with Cloud, then cast our own Blackblade Reforged, triggering Esper Sentinel and Rurik Thar. We need all our mana to equip, so we let Terra get a card, and tap out to give Philia a second equipment. The plan is to send our flyers at Terra and the dog at Ruby, which will knock them down low enough that they can't cast any spells with Rurik Thar on the board, while letting us blink Cloud for a little extra toughness. We do just that, and Terra cracks a few treasures, getting up to 12 life, before using Swords to Plowshares to exile the Seriema, bringing us back up to 21. We connect, bringing Ruby down to 4 and Terra down to 1, but it's effectively 5 with their remaining treasures. We finally get the initiative and grab our planes, and the Sword of Hearth and Home lets us blink Beza, returning it to our team along with 2 fish tokens and a card, which is just an unhelpful Arid Mesa. After that we pass, and Philia brings back Cloud, who has nothing to find, and the dog picks up another 1/1 counter. White Plume untaps Carmen again on Ruby's upkeep, and I definitely don't envy the Gruul player's position. They're in the worst spot out of the 3 of us and run the risk of king making, but they're also our only hope, since Terra can definitely end the game on their turn. They can't pay any life to Sylvan Library in their draw step, and they start things off with Morag, Fury of Akum, which could definitely help them get some work done with their trampling board. They draw a card off Garrett's Uprising, then head to combat and swing at us with Rurik, Old Gnawbone, Goreclaw, and Ruby, the latter 2 of which trigger for some pump. We opt to block with everything we can, taking down Goreclaw and Ruby to reduce their future damage output and soaking up some additional damage, leaving only Bruna and Phalia on our board and taking us down to 12 life. They take the initiative, adding some counters to Old Gnawbone, and then make 9 treasures. Their land drop is Rogue's Passage, which hopefully spells Terra's doom as it triggers Morag. They crack some treasures, boosting Terra's life to 4 with Carmen triggers to recast Ruby, and then they switch phases and head into their extra combat step. They swing with Old Gnawbone at Terra and Ruby and Rurik at us, and with Ruby's trigger on the stack, they use 3 treasures to activate Rogue's Passage, targeting their dragon, leaving Terra dead if they don't have any more interaction. Blocking Rurik Thar to take it out is tempting, but we put Bruna in front of Ruby instead, not wanting to activate any of the cards in their hands, since as it stands, we'll survive at 1. There are no further tricks though, and they're able to take out Terra and make 23 treasures. They pass to us, and we draw Solitude, which is some nice insurance, and then we swing at them with Philia. They don't have anything, and decide to let Rurik Thar take them out by casting Big Score, meaning we win the game. Wow, I was not expecting to win that game, and I think the most valuable takeaway from this one is about playing to your outs. I want to give a shout out to the Ruby player for navigating that final turn in just about the only way that gave them a chance to win, and didn't completely kingmake for us or Terra. The way it played out, they needed us to make some bad blocks, but people make bad blocks all the time, and the board state was incredibly complicated. Sometimes the only way out is to offer opponents the chance to make mistakes, and while fortunately we didn't, it was the right choice, and I don't think many players would have approached that turn the way they did. We also played to our outs the turn before. Our attack into Terra was a little futile, but it was a situation where we had to make them take game actions to survive. If they'd been able to hold on to their swords for Old Gnawbone, they definitely would have won the game. By forcing their hand, we increased the chance that Ruby might have some lines to take out Terra, while still feeling like they had a chance against us as well. Another related takeaway is holy cow Rurik Thar. That one card had a massive impact on this game, and letting it live was instrumental to our victory, since Ruby had great outs to finding a way to get another land into play if they could dig with Big Score and other non-creature spells. It also took out Shram entirely and knocked Terra down into territory where they could be taken out. This was a really impressive showing from Terra, and it's not the first time I've seen that commander pop off. The sheer value it can produce if it gets going, coupled with always having an impressive board state, leads to situations that are a total pain in the butt to edit, which generally correlates to winning the game. They were a little lucky that this game didn't feature any board wipes, but I still think they would have been in great shape if there had been one. Their play was absolutely meticulous, and they really knew their deck inside and out, squeezing every drop of value out of it turn after turn. The Shram player knew what their job at the table was, and they almost took out Terra single-handedly. It did seem like they weren't completely fluent in their deck though, as evidenced by not playing Shram before the Dowsing Dagger, or not realizing that protection from white would knock off Caduceus. But in terms of overall strategy, Voltron decks are usually at their most successful when they gun down the threat at the table so that everyone else leaves them alone. That strategy struggles on more even boards, usually emerging as the scariest deck itself since no one wants to take a big commander damage hit. We got to sit back while Shram did the dirty work, and Ruby did the same. That's often the best thing you can do when two players have a clear feud going, because as they expend resources on one another, it can be very easy to swoop in when the dust is settled and take the archenemy mantle with fewer answers around the table to keep you down. We had an advantage over Ruby in sort of Hearth and Home though, letting us freely pressure them so they'd be more vulnerable when the time came, and also letting us freely get value off Philia. With that politically fascinating game behind us, let's see what Game 2 has in store. Our first opponent is the fearsome Tatiova, Benthic Druid. The Cynic commander lets its controller draw cards and gain life for putting lands into play. We can expect ramp, and more ramp, since doing so will fill their hand, along with other landfall synergies and massive spells to help pay off all their mana production. This is one of those commanders that's archenemy before the game even begins, so hopefully the rest of the table will help us keep them in check. They win the die roll, meaning that we're going last. Next up we have Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor, a character that we waited way too many years to see a card of. Gix is weirdly one of my favorite characters from all of Magic, and definitely my favorite villain. This mono-black Edric lets everyone draw cards for attacking at the cost of 1 life apiece, as long as they attack someone other than Gix. Gix also has a mana sync ability that lets them steal as many cards as they're willing to discard from the top of someone else's deck. We're expecting an aggressive curve, likely with evasive threats to make the most of their commander's first ability, along with most of the standard mono-black staples. Our third opponent is Inspirit Flagship, a commander we've covered previously on the channel. Be sure to check out the video. This Jeskai spacecraft is probably the best source of charge counters in all of Magic, and when fully stationed becomes a 5/5 flyer that makes the rest of its controller's artifacts indestructible and hexproof. They'll likely be packing a ton of artifacts and some counter synergies like Proliferate, and I'm curious to see how they've built their deck. Our hand is pretty lackluster, and we ultimately end up keeping it based on who our opponents are. Tatiova is likely to allow our Deep Gnome Terramancer to help us catch up on lands. Blackblade Reforge is more of a late game card for us. We do have some removal in Skyclave Apparition in case anyone gets out of hand early. Recruiter of the Guard can help find whatever we might need by the time we get to 3 mana, and Elspeth is a faraway play but looks to be very powerful at a table that's likely to have a lot of combat. Everyone begins with a full hand of 7, and Tatiova kicks things off with a forest. Gix has a swamp into a Banehound, but doesn't attack even though it has haste, which is a little unexpected. Inspirit plays a tapped Glacial Fortress before passing. Our draw step yields a very unhelpful Celestial Corinne, and we just play our plains. Tatiova has an island and casts Growth Spiral, drawing and playing a second island, which we're happy to see since it makes it more likely that they'll have a tutor ramp spell for our gnome later. Gix plays Shizo, Death Storehouse, and casts a Mind Stone before getting in for 1 lifelink damage on Tatiova with their doggo. Inspirit has a mountain and just passes. We draw a Guardian of Faith, and things aren't looking great. We do have a nice little Celestial Corinne hand building up though, which could help us catch up if we struggle. Tatiova doesn't let us down though. They cast Cultivate, and we respond with our Terramancers. They search up 2 forests, putting 1 into play, which triggers the gnome, and so we get a plains, and they put a forest on their hand. They then cast Utopia Sprawl on one of their forests, naming blue. Gix has a Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, which we might want to waste land if we can find some more lands. They cast their commander and swing Banehound at Tatiova again, drawing a card from Gix and canceling out the Hound's lifelink when they connect. Inspirit has a command tower and then casts Thirst of Knowledge instead of their commander, which is a play I don't love since they're going to end up discarding 2 no matter what. They discard Mindless Automaton to the Thirst and then Evolving Wilds to hand size, which is sad given how much we're leaning on our gnome. We draw a 7-drop, but it's at least a 7-drop that will likely have a huge impact on Gix's board down the line. Recruiter of the Guard is more flexible, so we decide to cast our commander, and since we need mana more than anything else right now, we tutor ourselves up a potato, Tataru Taru. We swing our Terramancer at Tatiova, hoping to find a land drop with Gix's trigger, which we don't, but at least we found the next best thing. a mana ball. We had to discard and consider pitching Elishnorn so that we can recruit her for Karmic Guide and recur it, but that's a high threat play for the player who's currently behind, and we may need our recruiter for something else soon. So we ditch our Blackblade Reforged instead, since it's not likely to do much for us anytime soon. We're fully expecting Tatyova to come down and be followed up by a land, but instead they cast a Rites of Flourishing, which we're very happy to see. They just tap out after that for auto pass value and pass the turn. Gix gets to draw an extra card thanks to Rights, and ups their wastelandable land count with Cabal Coffers. They follow up with an Imperial Seal that I'm assuming is grabbing them Urborg and pay 2 life for the Game Changer before heading to combat. Gix and Banehound both smack Tatyova, and they lose 2 life of their own to draw 2, including the card they sealed to the top of their library. After that, they cast Drana, Liberator of Malakir, which is a lot more reasonable than anything I was expecting based on how their turn started. Inspirit gets their extra card and plays a plane, casting the very fun new card Long Range Sensor, and then they play Great Furnace and cast Gavel of the Righteous. We draw Gilrain and Demolition Field. We were hoping for 2 lands, but at least the one we found means we can deal with both of Gix's problematic lands, and goes well with Terramancer. We play the field, and then attack with our Terramancer, this time swinging at Inspirit. This is a political attack, aiming to signal to Tatyova that we aren't completely out for their blood, since their group hug is very valuable to us. That might mean that whatever big plays they start making are directed solely at Gix, which would be great for us. Gix's trigger finds us a Soul Ring, which is again not a land, but it helps. We cast it, then cast Ataru, giving the draw to Inspirit to show no hard feelings after attack, or more realistically, because they're the least threatening. We get a tap treasure and draw a land, playing and cracking the Prismatic Vista for a plains, and then using it to help cast Gilrain. We could start stationing the Seriema so that we could blink it later, but at this stage we'd rather have a blocker. We pass, holding up our wasteland in case Gix gets silly. Rights triggers for its controller, and they finally cast Tatyova, following up immediately with a Forest to gain a life and draw a card. They tap out and pass once more. We consider wastelanding Nykthos, but that would likely ensure a big attack at us from Gix, so we let it ride. They get their Rights of Flourishing card and use Nykthos to cast Gaunty Night Minister, adding another combat trigger that the whole table can get in on. They then cast another Game Changer, Chrome Box, exiling a Gifted Aetherborn to it, and then use it to help cast Mogus Marauder, which gives their whole board haste and menace with Devotion to Spare. They attack us with Banehound and Drana and send the rest of their creatures at Tatyova. Drana connects first, putting a counter on their team and then drawing them a card and exiling a card from us thanks to Gaunty, and then everything else hits and they get 4 more triggers from each of their mono black legends. In their second main, they play a Swamp and then our plains, then cast Tatyova's Blade of Cells, netting a treasure from Gaunty, and then pass. Definitely the problem at this point. Inspirit gets an extra card, and then cast a Soul Ring of their own. They finally cast their commander, and follow up with a Phyrexian Metamorph, which copies Tatyova. They crew Inspirit before playing a Clifftop Retreat, drawing a card and gaining a life, and then cast Dispatch, targeting Drana, which gets a nod from us since we were strongly considering Skyclave Apparitioning the Vampire on our turn. They head to combat, adding counters to the Gavel instead of the Censor with Inspirit, and then pass to us. Even with 2 draws, we still can only find mana rocks and not lands, and the Linvala we find is likely only good against Inspirit, who isn't really a problem for us right now. We attack them though, with our Gnome finding a generous gift from Gix and a Thought Monitor from their deck thanks to Gaunty. That gives us some incentive to play out our Mana Vault and Arcane Signet so we can cast the Stolen Artifact for only 2 mana, triggering Gaunty again for a treasure. Somehow, we still don't draw any lands, but we do find a solid play for the turn. We were considering casting Elspeth beforehand, but with the makeup of the board, she's likely to just get 1 activation before dying, and we're pretty sure we can get more out of her than that. We wasteland the Nykthos to do our part against the Phyrexian Menace, then cast Runetail, which flips immediately since we have more than 30 life, and makes our board very good at blocking. We had to clean up, pitching Archivist of Pogma since card draw isn't really a problem for us right now. Tatyova draws their extra card and plays an island to draw 1 and gain 1. They follow up with a Spark Double, making a 4/4 Tatyova, and then follow up again with Explosive Veggies. Oh boy. This gets them 2 tap basics and 4 Tatyova triggers, but it does let us grab a plains with our Gnome. The scales are starting to tip again, and now it's seeming like Tatyova might have been the villain all along. They play a Vine Glimmer Snarl for more cards and life before moving to end step, but Gix sacrifices a treasure to Fatal Push our Gilrain, which is sad. Tatyova discards 4 lands and an Evolution Sage before passing to Gix. The Praetor draws their extra card and plays a Swamp. Then they have their 3rd Game Changer, their own Mana Vault, and cast Rankle, Master of Pranks, followed by a Grey Merchant of Asphodel with 10 Devotion, draining the rest of us and gaining 30. Yikes. They head to combat, swinging Mogus Marauder at us, which is puzzling, and everything else at Tatyova. We block with our Invincible Potato, and both Tatyovas jump in front of Gaunty. Gix gets a mess of triggers, stealing 3 cards from Tatyova, drawing 3, and then choosing all 3 options for Rankle, which we don't mind too much since that gets a treasure from the Scion Secretary. We draw an Emiria, and the 2 Tatyovas get sacrificed, along with Tataru and Banehound, and we opt to discard our Linvala. After combat, they play a Breeding Pool from the Simic deck untapped and pass. Inspirit draws their extra card, plays a Buried Ruin, and then casts Ragast, another deck we featured on this channel, followed by a Thrumming Bird. They sorcery speed a Chaos Warp on Rankle, which slips into a Swamp, which triggers our Terramancer. We're actually getting pretty close to Emiria coming online. They remove a counter from the gavel to equip it to Rigost, then use the buffed lobster to fully station Inspirit. The flagship adds 2 more counters to the gavel and then attacks Gix, adding a counter to long-range sensor and getting in some commander damage. That does it for them and they pass to us. We're finally starting to find land drops with our extra jaws, and also find Split Up, which could break this game wide open for us if we find the right window. First things first, we have to deal with Blade of Cells, which can kill the table next turn with Grey Merchant. We could actually take out Tatiova by playing Elish Norn and Corinne and stationing our commander, and since the blade is theirs, it would end up going away. But they're very incentivized to help deal with Gix, so we want to keep them around. Instead, we play our planes and use Skyclave Apparition to exile the equipment. We follow up with Elspeth, and then plus her to create soldiers to help block Gix on the ground. We pass after that, holding up Generous Gift and Demolition Field. Rites of Flourishing triggers for Tatiova, and they cast Ancient Green Warden, probably the best blocker they have available. This lets them replay 2 of the lands they discarded earlier, which gives them enough mana to recast their commander as well before passing. Gix heads into their turn, drawing from the rights and taking 1 from their mana vault. They play a swamp, then cast Tatiova's Bane of Progress. We float our artifact mana in response, and the elemental enters and takes out all the artifacts and enchantments. So Inspirit protects the rest of that player's board, which is good, because otherwise they'd probably be out of the game. They follow up with the Crypt Ghast and attempt to move phases, and we don't want to lose our mana, so we opt to Demolition Field the Cabal coffers. Gix getting a swamp triggers our Terramancer, and so we end up 2 planes ahead when all is said and done, and Emeria is now online. Unfortunately, that gave them enough mana to activate Gix, which is something I completely forgot was a thing. They discard their whole hand of 7 and get to exile the top 7 cards of Tatiova's library and cast whatever spells they find for free. This gets them a slew of Extort triggers from the Ghast, but they can only pay for 1. They get a Rampaging Baloths, and the Cultivate that follows nets them a Beast token. They then cast Oracle of Moldiah, Lotus Cobra, and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. The last stolen spell is Fade from History, which wipes out all the artifacts Inspirit died to save, but does leave them with a bear. Like I suspected, this prompts a concession from the artifact player who's been behind all game. They try to move phases again, and we consider turning Crypt Ghast into an elephant, but ultimately we don't think they're going to do much attacking on this board, and gamble that Split Up is going to be very good for us next turn. Our read was right, because they head to their second main and activate Jace, milling themselves for 2 and drawing a card. They play a swamp, triggering the Cobra and the Balos, and then follow up with the Sword of the Animist. On our upkeep, Emeria brings Gilrain back, and we draw a very welcome Nykthos of our own. We recast the Seriema, locating Venat, and then do some targeted stationings, half our most valuable creatures while keeping the spaceship from becoming a creature. We cast Split Up, destroying all untapped creatures, which clears our opponent's boards at the cost of our soldier tokens. Nether Trader triggers many times, but Gix doesn't have the mana to reanimate it. We replace our soldiers with an Elspeth activation before using some of our floating mana to cast Venat, and we follow up with Celestial Corinne, drawing a card off Crystal Maw. Firmly in control of the game, we pass the turn. Tatiova isn't giving up yet though. They cast the very powerful Consecrated Sphinx before casting Ominous Seas, and then they use Rite of Replication to make a second game-changing Sphinx. If they can draw some free interaction, this might end up being a problem. Thanks to their Sphinges, they draw 4 when Gix draws, adding 4 counters to Ominous Seas. The mono-black player is now in Desperation mode and activates Jace to mill themselves and draw, which is 4 more draws and counters for Tatiova. They found another mana doubler, Nirkana Revenant, and cast it despite our looming Elspeth activation. Also despite that activation, Tatiova cashes in 8 counters for an 8/8 in response. Gix then casts our Cloud and uses him to search up a Lightning Greaves. They play a Swamp before casting the Boots, and equip Nissa's Sword to the Revenant and then attach the Greaves. They attack into Elspeth, triggering the Sword, which triggers our Terramancer for another plane. We just put a soldier in front of the Revenant to save its boss, and they pass to us. Emeria brings back Linvala, and then Tatiova gets 4 more draws and counters. We've had enough of that though, so we -3 Elspeth to clear out everything big, and this time Gix does bring back Nether Trader. We use a soldier to station the Seriema up to combat capability, and then just head to combat, wanting to eliminate Tatiova in case they've drawn any free counterspells. We knock them out, which conveniently deals with Jace, and take a chunk out of Gix as well. Then in our second main, play Urza's Saga, and activate Gilrain to blink the Seriema, grabbing Philia.
We then cast Recruiter of the Guard, searching up a Solitude.
The thought process here is to conserve our Elish Norn and some other resources in case they find a board wipe, but after taking their draw step, they concede, meaning that we win the game. We got off to an awkward start, but fortunately having Tatiova at the table meant most of the early aggression from Gix went their way, leaving us time to get some Terramancer triggers and draw cards off Gix to get a plan in place to deal with the mono-black swarm. I think this game was a testament to the fact that if you're going to play an archenemy commander like Tatiova, you should really embrace the role. Savvy players are going to target you before you can start generating massive advantage, so it's a good idea to build your deck to present a board presence to help mitigate all that damage. Even with multiple early ramp spells, Gix was able to get underneath them and keep them off balance while continually replenishing their resources. I think this was an impressive showing from Gix. Aggro decks are hard to pull off in Commander, but aggro decks that can continuously refill their hand while applying pressure can be incredibly threatening. Edric is a known boogeyman of the format, and Gix is basically a mono-black Edric, which brings other tools to the game plan. Unfortunately for them, and fortunately for us, they forfeited their ability to keep more gas in the tank when they activated Gix, overextending for the first time all game, which we were able to punish severely with our split up. Inspirit never really got off the ground, and I think that can mostly be chalked up to deck building. I tinkered with that commander for a while before arriving at the aggressive list I featured on the channel, and I got there by finding that you really want a critical mass of 2-drop creatures that can station Inspirit on turn 3 to start generating value. It looks like this may have been an upgraded precon, so they might not have had access to all the cards they wanted, but Inspirit naturally favors an aggressive plan, and they seem to be leaning into the usual mid-range formula for commander decks. I do want to commend them for their gameplay overall though. They had some great sequencing, and they used their removal on the same targets we would have in their spot, identifying the most important pieces of Gix's army to take care of. Despite never really getting into the game, they still had more of an impact on it than the Tatioba deck managed to. I think this was a great game for showcasing how the deck should play from behind. Rather than our plan A of Philia, we went for a small value play into Tarutaru to help develop our mana. We could have gotten Philia and started blinking the Seriema, for sure, but we didn't need more cards at that stage, and doing so probably would have drawn Gix's attention our way. Instead, we looked a little desperate, which likely lowered our threat index and let us steadily build up a win. It was also a nice example of factoring in opponents and mulligan decisions. We never would have kept that hand if we didn't have a likely way to trigger Deep Gnome Terramancer and Tatioba, and a way to draw cards in Gix. And the way things played out, we would have been doomed with that draw into many other tables. This realization made me change up the order of the gameplay discussion to talk about our opponents first, because who we're playing against often impacts our mulligan decisions. If you have multiple opposing commanders that are likely to play out a lot of creatures, a weak hand with a board wipe can be a very strong hand, for example, so knowledge of the format can really pay off before the game even begins. Overall, this deck was a lot of fun and felt powerful without being completely oppressive, which is territory that mono white can easily stray into. I'm definitely a toolbox enjoyer, and the overall structure of the deck worked out well. I was really impressed by our ramp package, which feels like it could be copy and pasted into other mono white lists pretty successfully. One small change I would make would be to add Flagstones of Trocaire, which I forgot about when I was building the deck. I'd also think about subbing out Wasteland for Ghost Quarter for the synergy with Deep Gnome Terramancer and Archivist of Ogma. I'm sad to report that the Celestial Corinne package wasn't as exciting as I was hoping. It wasn't bad necessarily, and I can definitely envision games where it does work. I was actually considering some lines in Game 2 where I recruited up Karmic Guide to take out the multiple Tatiovas on the board, and we had Guardian of Faith to deal with Gix, but it wasn't ever great, and it felt like it would usually be eclipsed by Meosion of Cleansing Fire. We didn't see that card in action in this video, but in the 2 other games I played, it did a ton of work. Those were the only other games I played with this list, and I also won, and one-sided board wipes from Meosion were a big part of that. Those games were pretty lopsided, with us basically goldfishing the table, and I don't think that makes for great content. Anyway, I think I'll probably leave Corinne and Friends in because I like the meme of it all and have fond memories of the original Kamigawa block, but if you wanted to punch up the deck, it and the cards that support it could definitely be cut for other legendary creatures or blink targets. Legends I'd be thinking of include Skrelv, which could protect Philia and help her connect, either of the Thalias, which can help shut down certain strategies, Mangara for more tutorable card draw, Myrel for more token production and stopping opponents from taking out the Seriema in combat to blow us out, and Heliod Suncrown and or Caduceus Staff of Hermes for some life gain. For enhancing the overall blink package, cantrip creatures like Spirited Companion or Wall of Omens are nice low-cost options, while Core Cartographer and Solemn Simulacrum can help with our ramping needs. Token production like Reverent Hoplite or Evangel of Heliod would play well with Skullclamp and Elishnorn, and with some extra 1-drops, the new Starfield Shepherd could do some work. On that note, it's likely that Esper Sentinel should just be in this list to help fill our hand. I try to cut staples where I can in favor of more synergistic options, but it seems like that one would be worth finding room for. Otherwise, I think the overlapping synergies of the deck worked out really well, and it felt like we had the right amount of all our different types of cards. I wouldn't change that actual architecture so much, more just move around some furniture. It definitely feels like our 3 game changers are the best options available for the list. It's no secret that Smothering Tithe is strong, but with the flash elements of this deck, it felt really good to be able to tap out and then accrue some treasures during opponent's turn another game. That's going to do it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and if you've made it this far, definitely be sure to subscribe for more great Commander content each week, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the deck, the games, the video in general, or what you might want to see in the future. Good luck and have fun in your future endeavors. Magic Boy out.